Many of us can walk into our kitchen and do this. Behold, the incinerator. You may know it by different names, the garbage disposal. In 1927, an architect designed the first one of these using a simple motor and some sheet metal. And basically he provided it as an alternative way for people to take care of their food waste, their food scraps. Instead of having to maybe take them outside and feed them to animals, instead of having to put them in the trash, people were able to conveniently put their food waste right down the drain, and with a little bit of water and that motor running, the waste would be gone and it would be somebody else's problem. In fact, that food waste would be crushed, ground down, and then it would be taken care of by the wastewater facility, treatment facility. So that was the solution in 1927, and it's very convenient for us today. But are we unnecessarily tossing great nutrients right down the drain for the sake of convenience? And I would say that we are. So today we are going to learn about how to start a worm bin. And it actually provides a beautiful alternative to the incinerator. And what it allows us to do is it allows us to take our food waste, and instead of tossing it out as trash, as garbage, we give it new life and we give it the opportunity to nourish the next generation of plants. So come with me as we work on starting a new worm bin. Hi, welcome back to Worm Watts, where we harness the God-given power of compost worms to transform organic waste into amazing living fertilizer. Now, today's episode, we are working on starting a new worm bin. And so I want to introduce you step by step to each of the, basically each of the steps that we're going to go through. And I'm going to start out with the container to use. So this one is holding some of our brown materials. We'll leave that to the side for now. And I just want to take you one step at a time. This is just a little storage tote. You can actually see the branding on it. Heavy duty flip tote. And that's basically what it is. Let me show you, actually, it's a 12-gallon tote, and it's measures about 22 by 16 by 13. So 22 inches long by about 16 inches wide and about 13 inches deep. So that's what we're looking at. And you'll also notice that it's just intact. I'm not doing anything to it. In some of my previous bins, I've drilled some holes up here. That just allows for a little bit of airflow, but I don't think that's truly necessary. This bin is not airtight, so there is enough airflow in the bin. As I've worked with worms, I haven't had too many problems with them lacking airflow. If you decide to, though, you can always take a drill and just drill some holes right in there. I'm not going to do that with this tote. I'm going to leave it nice, intact, and simple. So basically, again, this is a storage tote. That's what we're using. And I have another video on my channel from months ago that discusses why I don't drill holes in the bottom of my worm bins. That's something you can check out as well. If you've read a little bit about starting a vermicomposting bin or a worm bin, you may have seen others who will put holes in the bottom, and there are fine reasons to do that, but I prefer not to. And if you'd like to learn more about that, please check out that video. I'll try to link it in the description so that you can have easier access to it. So when we're starting our bin, after acquiring the bin itself, we want to add bedding. So similar to how you would prepare, any kind of home or living space for any kind of creature, the worms also need a place in which to live that's comfortable and that suits their specific needs. So composting worms require a moist environment because they're going to be breathing through their skin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start with this brown material here. This is something that I've been using just newly in my bins, but I really like it. And this is sawdust. Now, in a lot of people's case, maybe they don't have access to sawdust. You can use, I've previously started bins with shredded cardboard. You can either use a paper shredder to do that. Heavier duty paper shredder would be ideal. Or you can just take the cardboard, moisten it, and tear it yourself. That's another nice way to to get the cardboard in the way you might want it. You can also utilize leaves, so dry fall leaves. You can utilize those as a bedding as well. I've also utilized coffee chaff, which is the skin of the coffee cherry, the actual seed of the coffee cherry. When it's roasted, the skin actually of that seed comes off, and so that's referred to as coffee chaff or silver skins, and I've used that as another brown material in my bedding material in my bins. Regardless of what you use though, the principles still remain about the same, and I'm just going to walk you through what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to get my worm bin container right up next to my container of sawdust, and I'm just going to transfer until I've got a nice several inches worth of my dry brown material in the bin. With something like sawdust, you do have to keep in mind that it can get into the air and make it kind of difficult for you to breathe. You don't want to be inhaling a whole bunch of that. So just keep that in mind as a precaution if you're going to do that. So we're just going to continue to fill the bin. And we're looking for about, I would say probably about 3 inches deep of the sawdust. And I'm doing this approximately, so it's not an exact science. But to give you a rule of thumb, I want it to be deep enough that I can comfortably bury my food scraps. So that's one thing that's important, and it's going to help to keep this as pleasantly smelling as possible, is being able to bury your food scraps. It also keeps pests away. So I think this is a good amount of bedding. You'll notice that I'm just going to even that out there. You'll notice that we haven't gone too high. I'll put my finger in just to give you an idea. So it goes basically right up to my knuckle. So I would say we have about 3 to 4 inches worth of it. And notice that this is dry. Now, as I mentioned, it's very important for the bedding material to be moist. And the moisture level that we're looking for is that of a wrung out sponge. So what I'm going to do, given the amount of bedding material that I have, I'm going to go get some water. And it's important when you're working with worms, the The microbiome in your bin is very important. Worms actually are after microbes, so we want to use non-chlorinated water because chlorine can impact the way that the microbes are able to flourish, and we don't want that in our bin. So I will be right back with some water. All right, I've got a couple jugs here of rainwater that I collect, and I'm just going to use those to try to saturate this. Obviously, again, we don't want it to be fully saturated. We want it to be about the moisture level of a wrung out sponge. So one thing you want to keep in mind is how absorbent your brown material is. So wood chips are very absorbent. So I'm probably going to need more water than this. But at this point, what I'm doing is I'm just utilizing my hand and trying to distribute that water throughout the bedding material, because you don't want one area to be sopping wet and another area to be really dry. So in order to promote a healthy bin, you really want to try to make sure that you are, the best way to have a good worm bin, honestly, is going to be to focus on creating an environment that is pleasant for the kind of microbes that the worms are going to be interested in consuming. So if you do that, you will have a very effective worm bin. And some of the things that the microbes need are moisture, right? In the absence of moisture, the microbes are not going to be able to proliferate. And then they also need food, and we'll take care of that in just a bit. So again, I'm just pouring incrementally. You notice I came upon a dry spot there in the bin, as far as a dry spot of the sawdust, and I'm just working that water in. And you can see if I get a little bit closer here, the moisture is there's a little bit of moisture that's made it to the bottom there, but we don't want any standing liquid. So far so good as far as distributing the moisture goes. I do have one little dry spot over here. I'm trying to work the water into. And we're just going to add a little bit more. I want it to be nice and moist. And we also realize, because we're not just going to be having bedding in here, because we will also have food, we have to realize that the decomposing food is also going to produce its own moisture. It's going to add moisture to our bin, so that's another reason why we don't want the bin to be too soggy. We don't want our bedding to be too soggy. So far it's looking good as far as the moisture level goes. Not seeing a lot of dry spots. And one way that I've heard before that you can test your moisture level, is to get a handful of your bedding and squeeze it. And as I do, there's water coming off of it, several drops worth of water. So that tells me that my bedding is sufficiently moist. You don't want a ton of drops coming off. Usually I've actually heard that you should squeeze it and only be able to get one drop of water out. So if that's what we use as our measuring rod, I have a little bit more moisture in here than that, but I don't think it's going to be harmful. Again, we've distributed the moisture well throughout the wood chip, the sawdust. So that looks good. And I did misspeak there, but it did remind me that that is another brown material that you can use in your worm bin is wood chips. You can actually utilize wood chips as another bedding material. Though I really do like the absorbency and how fine the sawdust is compared to the wood chips. So I would recommend something a little bit finer than wood chips, but wood chips can also be a fine bedding. So we've moistened our bedding material, and at this point, I would like to go ahead and add in a little bit, just a touch of dry leaves that we have outside. So I usually gather up dry leaves from my local area, and I let them kind of sit outside, and that allows different microbes and even bugs and other critters to get in there. And by doing so, it kind of helps the leaves to be less quote unquote sterile. So when you get certain materials like cardboard, they are not, obviously every material is going to have bacteria and microbes living on it. But when you have a material that's outside and getting broken down by microbes, specifically by fungi and bacteria, that's going to be a material that is going to do much better in the worm bin. So since sawdust I haven't left this out to really culture at all, I would like to add in a little bit of some of the leaves, the fall leaves, in here to kind of add some microbes to the bedding material. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so this is a jute bag that I get from a local coffee roaster, and I've been able to put fall leaves that I've gathered from my local area in here. And because the jute bag is breathable and I leave it exposed to the elements, it just allows different stuff to get in here. And you can even see down here, I've got a little isopod, looks like a sow bug that is probably been in here feasting and living in these leaves, and that just helps with just adding some diversity to the bin and microbial diversity as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and get a little bit of this from the top here. Again, we have our bedding, we wetted it down. We're just adding in some leaves to increase the diversity of microbes. And I'm gonna try to dig a little bit further down in here into this bag. And as you can see, this is really nice. So you can see that there's a little bit of clumping to these leaves, and these ones look a little darker. So they've had a little bit more opportunity to decompose. And so that's really exciting to add that into the bin. As you can tell, these leaves are rather dry, so that probably has not allowed a lot of opportunity for decomposition. But yeah, we're just gonna add a light little layer of leaves, and I think that's about it. So it was really just 3 handfuls. I didn't add a ton. and that'll do it. So we've moistened the bedding. We've added some leaves for microbial diversity. And I think at this point we're ready to go ahead and add some food scraps. Now, in our first feeding, I plan to add frozen food scraps. And so if you have food scraps that you have around you, you're welcome to freeze them. I have some fruit that's frozen. Some of it actually expired well past the expiration date. I think it's maybe a year and a half past the expiration date, and it's frozen fruit. So I'm gonna go ahead and add that here to the worm bin. And the reason for adding in frozen food to start with is that I think it accelerates the breakdown process. Because when the fruit thaws, one, any cell walls and are going to burst from the freezing, and that's going to allow basically easier access for the microbes to get to the sugars and those aspects of the food material, and that's going to allow it to be more easily digestible for our worms, because we're going to have microbes acting on it sooner. So that's what we're going to do here. We've added in the leaves. Let me go get the food material. All right, so let's take stock of what we've got. Here's our food items. We've got a bag of sliced bananas, and it's already been opened, and just checking over here, it's got a best by date of about a year ago. This is late September of 2025, and this has got 2024 on there. So we're gonna go ahead and toss those in there. The nice thing is that they're already sliced, and one of the things that you want to keep in mind is when you're bringing scraps to your bin, just a consideration is the smaller the food item is, the smaller the pieces of the food item are, the more surface area is exposed where microbes can really start digging in. If you think about it, if you have like a, let's take an example of like, let's say you have a a slice of banana and you've got ants all around it. Let's say the ants represent our microbes. If you have a full slice of, if you have a full banana that's not sliced, only so many ants can accumulate or can gather on the outside of that banana. But if you open up the banana and you cut it up into slices, you now have more exposed places for ants to be able to get onto and to be able to eat, right? They can get on the top of slice A, they can get on the top of slice B, top of slice C, they can get around all of those individual slices. And so basically there are more spots at the watering hole, if you will, or in this case, the feeding trough, for them to get started. And so that's the same thing with our microbes. The more surface area is exposed, the more quickly they can begin to break down the organic matter. So we've got some sliced bananas here. And then here in this bag, open it up. All right, we have some peaches that are basically liquid that I just refroze. And then this is another bag of blackberries. So between all of those, we have 3 different types of fruit, lots of sugar, and that's going to be really helpful to get the bin started, to feed the microbes and get them going. And so when you start off a worm bin, you're really trying to, the engine of the worm bin is the microbes. And if they're not working, your bin is going to be slower to break down foods. It's kind of like in our example earlier, we were comparing this to the incinerator, right? So your garbage disposal, it has a motor on it. And the more horsepower that motor has, the more capability it has in terms of grinding power. And so our horsepower, our grinding power comes from the microbes. So if you have a lot of microbes and they're well fed, they can help to really tear through the food waste. What that means is that when you're starting out a worm bin and it's not super microbially active, we want to be a little bit lighter on how much food we add, because if we don't, we will overwhelm the bin with too much food, and that will create anaerobic conditions, conditions in which oxygen is not able to get down into the equation. And oxygen is hugely important because when you're managing a worm bin and you're doing vermicomposting or vermiculture, the worms do need an aerobic environment, right? One in which oxygen is present. So we need to make sure that we don't overwhelm the bin with too much food when we start off. And that can be kind of hard because I love adding new foods to a worm bin. but we have to recognize that if we do too much, it will actually slow things down and harm our worms. So we haven't added the worms in yet, but we're just getting things ready. One of the other things that we try to do in a worm bin is as we add these foods in here, we're going to add them only on one side of the worm bin, one end of the worm bin. And usually what I'll do, see this bin has a sticker on this side, and it doesn't have that same sticker on the other side. So you can kind of use that as a gauge so that you can remember, okay, I put the food in on this sticker side. But what we're going to do is we're going to put the food in along one side, and what that helps is it allows the worms, when we put them in, we can put them in on the opposite side, and they can kind of get acclimated without having to adjust immediately to whatever is going on with our food items. And that's especially important if you're adding in certain items that can take a little bit of time for microbes to really start digesting on, and things like onions, things like citrus. I am a big proponent of adding anything to the worm bin, anything that's natural and organic. I believe that it'll break down in the worm bin, given the right head starts and given the right conditions. So you do have to consider, though, the quantity of what you're putting in there, and then also the if there are any aspects of the food that you're adding that could take a little bit more time to break down. So, putting meat into a worm bin is going to be a little bit different than putting in banana slices. So we have to consider that. All right, so let's go ahead and add the food in there. I've done a lot of talking as far as explaining how this works. So let's go ahead and add it in. And this is really nice, by the way, just the feel of this. It actually reminds me of like a carrot cake. It's just nice and moist, and that's perfect. Just perfect moisture level. Again, we're looking for the bin's moisture level to be about that of a wrung out sponge. So I'm really liking the moisture level as I just even put my hand in the bin. All right, so this is the peaches that we had. And like I mentioned, it's basically just a big chunk of liquid at this point, frozen chunk of liquid. So I'm just gonna try to peel back the plastic off of it. And I'm gonna try to do this over the bin because it's got some juice coming off of it. So I'm gonna try to extricate it from the plastic. And I got it out. Look at that. It's just a solid chunk of peaches. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I put it again. I'm gonna make sure which side it's on. This is our sticker side. Sticker side is over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna pull back some of my bedding so that it creates like a bit of a pit. And I'm going to put the peaches down in that pit. And I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing with the blackberries. I'm going to put them into the same pit that I've created. It's a large enough pit that it'll be able to hold both of those. All right. So we've got both of we've got the peaches, we've got the blackberries, and now I'm going to actually cover over those frozen fruits. And so you cannot see them actually. I'll tip it this way. You cannot see the frozen fruit, it's right under here. And then in the middle, I'm going to go ahead and put a little trench of bananas. So I'm gonna do the same thing, dig out a little bit, and we'll put the bananas in the new trench that we've dug out now. All right, so that's our bananas. We're gonna cover that up as well. It's very important to cover up your food scraps. Oh, I've got a little bit more in this bag, so I'm gonna go ahead and put that in as well and cover that. it's very important to cover your food scraps so that you avoid unnecessary smells in the bin, and also to avoid flies and other pests from coming to your bin. So that's the best way to accomplish that, is by burying the food scraps. So with that done, I think we are about ready to just take a little look at the way the bin sits. As you can tell, it's about the same way we left it. You can't even tell just by visually inspecting it that we have food under there. And at this point, I think we're about ready to add the worms to the bin. So let's go ahead and get ready for that. All right, so here we are with the bin we've been working on. This is our new worm bin, and this is the worm bin that's going to be feeding us with some worms. So it's almost like a transplant, if you will, organ transplant, but we are transplanting some worms into this bin. And so this is one of my established worm bins, and the type of worms in here, I have a couple types that I use in my bins, but this one specifically is a bin of red wigglers, or Eisenia fetida. And you can see that in addition to the worms, we've also got some isopods, and we can get into how they're doing later. But for the time being, I'm just going to go ahead and work on transferring over some worms. So I've got my hand right here. I'm just going to go ahead and pull some worms for us. That's one worm right there. I'm going to set it down on top of the bedding. And these guys are probably nice and ready to join our bin. I'm glad that they have experience in another bin, and they've been in a nice environment. Nicely microbially active, I would imagine. So just gonna grab as many of these guys as we can. Whoa, look at that one. Flipping around on my finger. And we're gonna add that into the bin. And here's another one. Doing my best to focus this for you. And we're trying to add them on this side, this end of the bin, because this is not where we had food scraps. So we've added four worms so far. And I see a fifth that we can add in. Oh, whoops. I think I missed him. I might have dropped him. So hopefully, oh, whoa, there are more worms in the, look at that, there's a worm right there in the worm blanket. I won't grab that one because I don't want to have to pull him out and potentially have him catch on there. But yeah, we've got worms in a lot of spots here. So I'm gonna go ahead and dig down a little bit into the castings. And this is actually what the worms produce, is castings. And these castings that that are in here are a fantastic fertilizer for plants. And so that is the beauty of using worms to work on your food scraps, is that you can actually get second life out of your food scraps, right? You create a beautiful fertilizer instead of this just going to the waste collection facility. And I think this is actually a tag. Yeah, it is. Look at that. Jute bag. So this is actually the tag from a previous worm blanket that I had on here. And I believe the worms probably devoured that. So that was the tag from it. We just pulled that out. So let's grab this worm here and add it to our new bin. There we go. All right, I'm gonna try to get in here a little bit more and let's get some more worms out of here. All right, so I got a little handful of castings and I'm gonna set them on top of here, and then we'll just pull out the worms that are in these castings. There you go, that's one. I think we're at 7 worms now. Oops. That one flipped out of my hand. Very active guy. There we go. That's 8 worms now. Nine. And here's 10. And I'm going to try to go for somewhere in the neighborhood of at least 40 to 50 of these guys. The more we have, the more quickly they'll be able to actually get to the food scraps and work on them. So I'm not seeing any more worms in that little load of castings. So I'm gonna pull it back again. And this bin honestly is probably about ready to be harvested if I had to guess. It looks really nice. The castings are not, I've got 2 worms in my hand now. 3 in my hand now. So we're gonna add those in. I believe that's 13 worms now. All right, I've got 1 in my hand. Unfortunately, only 1. So 14. This is a bin that has definitely been well populated by the isopods. And I've got 2 more small worms right there in my hand. You can take a closer look at them as they wriggle around. Now it's time to put them in. I think we're about 16. 16 is what I believe we are at. I'm gonna dig further down into the bin and see what we can find here. That would be 17. And that is 18. All right. The further down we get, the more compact it is. It's not as fluffy. I believe that's 19. Forgive me if I lose count. That is 20. I was trying to get 2 worms there, but that did not work out. Here we go, here's 21. And here is 22. There's 23. Sorry, let me zoom in so that you can see what's even going on. The back and forth is kind of difficult to... So I think we're at 23 and you can kind of see the worms in there. There's a little guy right there. Some little wriggly thing. I think it's a smaller worm perhaps. So you can see the worms, they're moving around. So we're at 23 at this point. I'd like to shoot for 50, so we're back in the host bin where we're getting our worms and doing our worm transplanting, if you will. And we've gotten a fair bit out of that side. I'm gonna go ahead and close up that side and give those worms, or give that area a chance to rest. And we're gonna go to the opposite end of the bin. And by the way, there's a coconut in here, if you were not aware previously. Some of our past episodes, we've taken a look at that, and it's quite something to behold. Oh wow, I'm actually gonna lift up the coconut and look at the worms underneath there. So let's go ahead and take some of those. It's 24. And I can't find anybody else, so I'm gonna go ahead and put the coconut back. And let's go back to the other side of the bin we were trying to look at. In here, I've got pieces of coconut shell that are broken. I believe that's 25 worms that we've added so far. And there we go for 26. Here's 27. I've got 28 now. Whoops. All right, so the transplant is over and we got 50 worms. I went ahead and fast forwarded for you. So we got 50 worms in here, and I don't know, maybe I'll add some of these isopods in. These guys are out and about. They're on the surface of the bin. It doesn't look like they definitely don't mind being out here. I'd love to snag a few of them, but we'll go ahead and stick back to the worm bin. So we've got our 50 worms, and we toss them into this general area. And one thing that you'll note, let me try to zoom out and then zoom back in for you. One thing that you will notice is that they are going to start bedding down. Worms like to stay away from the light, so they will bed down into this first and they'll kind of acclimate. And over time, they will start to find that food material, and I'll expect to see them actually toward that end of the bin because that's where the food is. But for right now, they're moving around. You can see them there. I'll try to hold it still for you, but you can kind of watch them slithering around and wiggling around in there as they acclimate to their new home. It's probably not as microbially active as the home that they just came from, but thankfully there are some castings in that general area. As they continue to process this, though, they will turn this into some very rich and microbially active vermicompost, which is really exciting. So this has been us establishing our worm bin. And at this point, what we would do as well, so we added our bedding, we added in some leaves to add some microbial diversity. We added in 50 worms to this side of the bin. And at this point, one of the other things that I'd like to point out about worms is that they utilize grit to break down some of the food that they eat. Now, thankfully, because we're using frozen food, it's going to likely thaw and be very nice, liquidy, and easy for the worms to take in, and easy for microbes to start working on. But we're gonna add some eggshell for grit as well, because that's something that I like to do when I'm in the bin, and it helps the worms to have something that they can use to actually, so they take in the grit and they use it to pulverize food material so they can break it down further. And so I'm going to go ahead and add in some crushed eggshell, which I do keep on hand. And this is our little container of crushed eggshell. Probably don't need a ton, but we'll go ahead and sprinkle this over the bin. Especially on that side where the food is, because we added the worms here now. So most of the food is on that side. I'm gonna go ahead and do one more scoop. And at this point, we'll leave the bin. I imagine it'll take maybe a week or so. We can check back in about a week and see how the bin is doing. But this is not something that we have to check in on every day, especially early on. But I am hoping to get to the place where we can add much more frequently to this bin, and see the worms take care of our food scraps. So that is one of the beautiful things about a worm bin. Again, being able to transform your organic waste into amazing living fertilizer. So without further ado, I'm actually going to name this bin the Incinerator, but it's going to be slightly different than the original. This one is themed after the 90s, and this bin allows us to for us to be in sync with our environment, more in sync with our food production, right? By taking our food scraps and hopefully cycling them back into the process of growing our food. And so this allows us to stay more in sync with that process. And also, it allows us to say bye, bye, bye to all those food scraps. So this is the Incinerator, S-Y-N-C, in case you didn't catch that. But yeah, each time we're in here, we'll be able to say bye, bye, bye to more food scraps. And hopefully the worms will be able to help us to take care of them. I'm gonna focus back in on the area where we had the worms, and I don't really see any on the surface anymore. It looks like they've really bedded down a little bit, especially since we were adding the grit. So really cool. This is our Incinerator, the natural version. And thank you so much for joining as we started our own worm bin. I'm gonna go ahead and close the cover on this. And I will point something out. I would like us, as we close this, I actually want us to take another look in the bin that we transferred these worms from. And I'd like to show you the lid of that bin. If you actually look closely at the lid, you can see that there are some castings even on the lid, right? Those little black spots. Everywhere those worms go, they're leaving behind some castings. And so sometimes the worms will find themselves crawling up the lid of the bin. As you saw when we transferred initially, many of the worms that we got actually were on the edge of the bin, right? They were crawling up the sides of the bin. And so pretty cool. Again, very amazing to see the worms cohorts, I guess. They're companions in the bin. In this bin, we have quite a few isopods, and they're very active, probably helping the worms to break down some of this organic matter. So glad to have them in the bin. I'm going to try to actually transfer some of these into our other bin. So let's see how that goes. I'm going to put my hand here, see if I can just Knock them in there. Okay, I've got 2. I was able to put a couple of them in there. So we'll see what we get, but it's fascinating just to see these isopods work. And it's neat to have, the isopods are not going to harm the worms. They actually work in tandem pretty well together. So, but yeah, you can see them really, really enjoying the top of the bin there. So maybe some of them want to come with us. Let's see if we can entice them. Nope. Nope, they're very happy here. So I was able to drop 2 of them in there, but the other ones don't seem to want to come. So we'll have to take their no as an answer. I might be able to scoop some of them. And just as a tip, you do not have to have isopods in your worm bin, but I like the diversity that they bring. So I'm gonna see if I can scoop some of them up and bring them over as well. Let's just scoop up this bunch here. There we go. We've got our isopods in there. So hopefully they will mature and reproduce. So more power to them if they're able to. I'm curious to see how they'll do in the, I have not had a lot of experience with isopods in the sawdust, but I do know that isopods really do a great job with the brown materials. So that would be our bedding material. So we'll see how they do here. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope this inspires you to start your own worm bin and to stop putting stuff down the garbage disposal. There are so many valuable food scraps that go down the garbage disposal, and they could instead be given a second life. And it really doesn't take a lot to get them started. So definitely consider this, and please check back in with us when we come back to this bin in about a week. All right, see you next time. Bye from the Insinkerator.